The village of Zuwana was alive with joy and celebration as Naima and Jabari's wedding took place. The air was filled with the sound of drums, laughter, and the sweet aroma of delicious food. Naima, a kind and hard-working woman, was overjoyed to be marrying Jabari, a well-respected hunter known for his bravery. She looked forward to building a happy home filled with love and laughter. However, from the very first day, Naima noticed that her mother-in-law, Mama Zalika, was not pleased. While others showered her with warm wishes, Mama Zalika barely smiled at her. She watched Naima with cold, calculating eyes, as if she were already looking for faults. In the village of Zuwana, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children, especially sons. Mama Zalika had long dreamed of holding a grandson in her arms, and now that her son was married, she expected one soon. As the months passed, Naima remained hopeful that she would soon conceive. Every morning, she prayed for a child, believing that in time the gods would bless her womb. But as each moon cycle came and went without a sign of pregnancy, the whispers in the village began. Women who once greeted her with warmth now exchanged knowing glances, and the murmurs behind her back grew louder. Mama Zalika was the most impatient of all. At first, she made small comments, sighing loudly whenever she passed Naima or shaking her head in disappointment. But soon her words turned sharp, like a blade. "A woman who cannot give birth is like a tree that bears no fruit," she muttered one evening as Naima served dinner. "What use is she in a man's home?" Naima tried to ignore the insults, but Mama Zalika did not stop. She began calling her a curse, saying that the ancestors must be punishing their family because of her. The villagers, already steeped in tradition, started to believe it too. Some even warned Jabari that if he did not take action soon, his bloodline would end. At first, Jabari defended his wife, telling his mother to be patient. He loved Naima and believed that children would come in time. But as the days turned into months, Mama Zalika's words became like poison, seeping into his mind. He started to look at Naima differently, his once loving eyes now filled with doubt. The warmth between them began to fade, and Naima could feel the distance growing. Naima's life slowly turned into a nightmare. Mama Zalika, who had once only used cruel words, now began treating her like a servant. Every morning, before the sun rose, Naima was ordered to fetch water from the river, sweep the compound, and prepare breakfast for the entire household. While the other women in the family rested or chatted, Naima worked tirelessly, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and cooking meals. If she ever paused to catch her breath, Mama Zalika would snap at her. "You have no children to care for, so at least be useful in this house," she would sneer. At mealtimes, the humiliation only worsened. Naima was no longer allowed to sit at the family table. Instead, she was given a small bowl of food and told to eat outside, like a stranger begging for scraps. She swallowed her pain along with the food, refusing to let her tears fall. As if that was not enough, Mama Zalika decided that Naima did not deserve to sleep under the same roof as her son. One night, without warning, she dragged Naima's bedding outside and pointed to the small hut at the edge of the compound, usually used for storing firewood. "From now on, this is where you will sleep," she declared. Naima stared in shock but said nothing. She had always believed that patience and kindness would change things, so she obeyed, carrying her mat into the tiny hut, curling up on the cold floor and whispering a silent prayer that one day her suffering would end. The whispers in the village grew louder with each passing day. Whenever Naima walked through the market or fetched water from the river, she could feel the eyes of the other women following her. They no longer greeted her with smiles, but instead exchanged pitying looks and shook their heads. Some whispered behind their palms, while others did not bother to lower their voices. "A wife with no child is like a pot with no water. Useless," one woman muttered as Naima passed. "The ancestors must have cursed her," another said. Mama Zalika did nothing to stop the gossip. In fact, she fueled it. She went from home to home, speaking in hushed but deliberate tones, telling anyone who would listen that Naima had failed her son. "A man's bloodline must continue," she would say. "Jabari needs a real woman, one who can give him a child." At first, Jabari ignored his mother's words, but soon, the pressure became too much. Men from the village pulled him aside and advised him to take another wife. "You are still young," they told him. "Why waste your life on a barren woman?" Mama Zalika encouraged him as well, reminding him daily that it was his duty to bring sons into the world. Slowly, the doubt in his heart grew stronger. The final blow came during a village gathering. It was a celebration of a new harvest, and the entire community had gathered to feast and dance. As the evening wore on, Mama Zalika suddenly stood and called for silence. With a voice filled with anger, she pointed at Naima. "This woman has failed my son," she declared. "She has brought shame to our family. How can a house be strong with no children to fill it?" Gasps filled the air. Naima felt her heart shatter into pieces. Her face burned with shame as all eyes turned to her. The humiliation was unbearable. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of everyone. She turned to Jabari, hoping for support, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. That night, Naima cried alone in her tiny hut. The pain of her husband's silence and her mother-in-law's cruelty was too much to bear. She knew she could leave, run away from this suffering, but something deep inside told her to stay. She still believed in fate, in love, and in the hope that one day things would change. So despite her broken heart, she stayed. The pressure on Jabari became too much to bear. Every day, his mother reminded him that a man without children was like a tree without roots. The villagers whispered that he was foolish for staying with a barren wife. Even his closest friends urged him to take another woman. Eventually, he gave in. One evening, he returned home with news that shattered Naima's heart. He had chosen a second wife. Her name was Sefu, a young and lively woman from a neighboring village. Mama Zalika wasted no time in welcoming her, showering her with love and attention, as if she had always been part of the family. Unlike Naima, Sefu was treated like a queen. She was given the best clothes, the best food, and a place in the main house. Naima felt invisible. The little respect she had left in the household disappeared overnight. She was no longer called Jabari's wife. She was just the barren woman. Mama Zalika took every chance to remind her of this. "You see, Sefu is a real woman," she said one morning, as she watched Naima washing clothes. "It did not take long for her to carry my son's child. That is what a wife should do." Naima clenched her jaw, holding back tears. She'd endured so much already, but this pain was deeper than anything before. When Sefu announced her pregnancy, the entire village rejoiced. Women came to the house, singing and bringing gifts. Mama Zalika beamed with pride, calling Sefu the true wife and treating her like a precious jewel. Jabari, once Naima's loving husband, was now always by Sefu's side, tending to her every need. If he spoke to Naima at all, it was only with coldness or indifference. Days turned into weeks, and Naima found herself completely alone. She still cooked, cleaned, and worked harder than ever, but now she was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. Months passed, and the long-awaited day finally arrived. Sefu went into labor, and the entire household buzzed with excitement. Mama Zalika could hardly contain her joy. She had already planned a grand celebration, certain that a strong grandson would be born to carry on the family name. The women of the village gathered outside, singing songs of blessing as the midwives worked inside. But then something went wrong. The songs of joy faded into silence. The door opened, and the midwife stepped out, her face heavy with sorrow. "The baby," she hesitated, looking at Jabari and Mama Zalika. The baby did not survive. A cry of anguish tore from Sefu's throat, filling the air with grief. The celebration that had been planned turned into mourning. Mama Zalika was devastated, but refused to accept defeat. "It was just bad luck," she insisted. "Sefu is young and strong. She will conceive again." And she did. Months later, she was pregnant once more. This time, Mama Zalika prayed harder, offering sacrifices to the ancestors. But once again, the pregnancy ended in heartbreak. Sefu lost the child before it could even be born. More pregnancies followed, but none brought the son Mama Zalika had so desperately hoped for. Each time, the pain deepened. The once cheerful Sefu became withdrawn and fearful, dreading the moment she would have to deliver yet another lifeless child. One evening, as the family sat in silence, Elder Bakari, the respected village healer, arrived at their doorstep. He had been watching from a distance, and now he could stay silent no longer. "For years you blamed Naima for your misfortune," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But has anyone ever thought that maybe Jabari should be tested?" His words sent a shockwave through the room. Mama Zalika stiffened. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice shaking. Elder Bakari looked at Jabari. "Sometimes the fault does not lie where we think it does," he said. "It is time to seek the truth." The air in the room grew heavy after Elder Bakari's words. Jabari shifted uncomfortably, while Mama Zalika's face twisted in disbelief. "That is impossible," she snapped. "My son is a strong man, a great hunter. The problem has never been with him." But Elder Bakari remained calm. "The ancestors do not lie," he said. If you truly seek the truth, let us perform the rituals. The next day, the village elders gathered at Elder Bakari's hut. Jabari sat nervously as the healer prepared sacred herbs and drew symbols in the sand. The ritual was ancient, passed down through generations, to determine a man's ability to father children. The elders watched in silence as Elder Bakari chanted, calling upon the spirits for guidance. After a long moment, he opened his eyes and looked at Jabari. His expression was serious. "The truth has been revealed," he said. "Jabari, you are infertile." A stunned silence filled the hut. Jabari's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mama Zalika shook her head violently. "No, that cannot be," she cried. "It is a lie. This must be some trick." But the village elders stepped forward, their voices firm. "We have seen the signs," one of them said. "The spirits have spoken. Naima was never the problem. The truth hit like a storm. For years, Naima had suffered, blamed for something that was never her fault. She had been shamed, humiliated, and cast aside. And all along, the real issue had been with the very man who had turned his back on her. Mama Zalika's legs gave way, and she sank to the ground, her body trembling. She had spent years tormenting Naima, calling her Barren, treating her like she was worthless. And now, the truth had come crashing down on her. The truth spread quickly through the village of Zuwana, faster than the wind could carry it. People who had once whispered about Naima's so-called barrenness now saw her in a new light. They had witnessed Mama Zalika's cruelty firsthand and had always believed her harsh words. But now, they saw the woman who had been blamed for everything was not at fault. It was Jabari, Mama Zalika's own son, who could not bear children. As the news spread, whispers turned into open conversations. The villagers who had once sided with Mama Zalika now shook their heads in disbelief. They could no longer support her. Some even mocked her for her years of cruelty, calling her out for how she treated Naima and how she had tried to destroy her. The once proud Mama Zalika, who had ruled the household with an iron fist, now became the subject of ridicule and scorn. Jabari too began to realize just how badly he had treated Naima. The weight of his mistakes crushed him. He had stood by while his mother tormented his wife, blaming her for something she had no control over. He had allowed Naima to suffer, all because he had been too weak to stand up to his mother. Filled with regret, Jabari went to Naima and fell on his knees, his voice breaking with guilt. "Naima, I am so sorry," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "I should have believed in you. I should have stood by you. Please forgive me. I was wrong." Naima, standing tall and proud despite the pain she had endured, looked at him coldly. "You were never the problem, Jabari," she said softly. "But it's too late now. I can't forgive you for what you've done to me." Meanwhile, Mama Zalika, who had spent her life blaming others and trying to control everything around her, felt the full weight of her actions. She had taken away Naima's dignity, her self-worth, and her happiness, all in the name of her own selfish desires. As the villagers continued to turn their backs on her, Mama Zalika could feel her strength fading. Overcome by shame, she collapsed to the ground, her body trembling. All the memories of the cruel things she had done to Naima, making her sleep outside, mocking her, forcing her to suffer, came flooding back. She could no longer hide from her actions. The reality of her behavior hit her hard, and she knew that she had lost everything. Karma's hand was swift and unforgiving. Seifu, Jabari's second wife, was devastated by the stillbirth of their child and the repeated miscarriages that followed. After all the pressure from Mama Zalika to give Jabari a son, Seifu could no longer ignore the truth. She was trapped in a marriage with no future. There was no hope of having the children she had dreamed of, and she couldn't stay with a man who had been the cause of her heartbreak. Seifu packed her things and left Jabari, her heart heavy with sorrow, but determined to seek a life where she could find happiness. Jabari, now alone, watched as his world fell apart. His mother's influence had led him to make terrible decisions, and now he was left with nothing. The village no longer looked at him with respect. People whispered about his infertility, about how he had blamed Naima for something that wasn't her fault, and how his pride and weakness had destroyed his marriage. As for Mama Zalika, her downfall was even more crushing. The villagers, once loyal to her, began to turn their backs. They remembered how she had treated Naima, how she had taunted her, humiliated her, and made her life a living hell. They reminded her of the countless times she had tormented Naima, calling her barren and worthless. The weight of their harsh words crushed her. She had thought she could control everything, but now she had lost the respect and support of everyone around her. Mama Zalika fell into a deep depression, unable to escape the reality of what she had done. Her pride had led her to destroy Naima's life, and now she was reaping the bitter consequences. She spent her days locked away in her hut, avoiding the villagers' stares and the voices that reminded her of her cruelty. The shame of her actions was unbearable, and she couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at her. What she had done to Naima could never be undone, and the village would never see her the same way again. The woman who had once been feared and respected was now just a shadow of her former self, a woman broken by her own mistakes. Despite all the pain she had endured, Naima chose to rise above the bitterness. The years of cruelty, the humiliation, and the unfair treatment could have broken her, but instead, they only made her stronger. When Jabari begged for her forgiveness, Naima's heart softened, but she knew deep down that forgiveness didn't mean she had to stay in a place that had caused her so much hurt. She had given her all to the marriage, but now she realized she had to let go for the sake of her own peace and future. Naima packed her belongings and left the village, determined to build a new life for herself. She found a small house on the outskirts of a neighboring village, where no one knew her past. There, she found a sense of peace she had never known. Over time, Naima adopted children who needed love and care, children who were as lost as she had once been. She poured her heart into raising them, teaching them kindness and strength, and in return, they brought joy and purpose into her life. Naima found happiness in a way she never expected. Her children became her world, and she realized that family didn't always have to be blood. It was the people who loved you and supported you through thick and thin. Meanwhile, Mama Zalika's life was nothing like it used to be. She spent her days in isolation, abandoned by the son she had tried so hard to control. Jabari, now full of regret, distanced himself from her. The villagers no longer feared or respected her. Instead, they pitied her. The woman who had once been the center of attention, the one who commanded respect, was now a shadow of her former self. Every day she relived the mistakes she had made, and the guilt weighed heavily on her heart. She knew that no matter how much she regretted it, she could never undo the harm she had caused. Naima had moved on, found happiness, and made a new family, while Mama Zalika was left alone, her actions having cost her everything she had ever wanted. The story of Naima and Mama Zalika teaches us a powerful lesson about the consequences of cruelty and false assumptions. Mama Zalika's constant cruelty toward Naima, based on the assumption that she was the cause of their family's troubles, led her down a path of shame and regret. By treating Naima so poorly, she not only destroyed her own relationships, but also lost the respect of the entire village. Her actions were driven by a belief that Naima's worth depended solely on her ability to bear children, and this narrow mindset led to her downfall. In contrast, Naima's kindness, patience, and ability to forgive, despite the harsh treatment she received, show the power of staying true to one's values. Instead of becoming bitter and vengeful, Naima chose to rise above the cruelty, forgive those who wronged her, and move forward with her life. By embracing the truth and letting go of the past, Naima found happiness in a new beginning, building a loving family and a life full of joy. This story reminds us that assumptions can be damaging, and the truth will always come to light in the end. It teaches us the importance of kindness, patience, and the strength to do what's right, even when the world around us seems unfair. Ultimately, the story shows that love, understanding, and forgiveness have the power to heal and bring about positive change, while cruelty and false assumptions only lead to regret